Thursday, September 14th, 1945. Tinian Island, Northern Mariana Islands, U.S. territory. Army nurse Kimiko Watanabe stumbled as American guards led her through the gate of what she'd been taught to call a Shuyu-jo, a death camp. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from the smell that hit her nostrils like a physical blow. Fresh bread, real bread, warm, yeasty, abundant bread wafting from somewhere beyond the wire. Behind her, 23 other Japanese women, nurses, telegraphists, comfort station managers, stopped walking. One collapsed to her knees. "Uso da," Kimiko whispered. "It's a lie." The woman next to her, former Imperial Army telegrapher Sachiko Tanaka, gripped Kimiko's arm with skeletal fingers. "They're fattening us for something worse," she hissed. "Don't trust it." But the smell kept coming, and with it, the sound of women's laughter. American women's laughter, not screams, not weeping. Laughter. Kimiko's stomach, hollow from 2 years of 600-calorie daily rations on Saipan, contracted painfully. The Emperor's final radio broadcast 18 days ago had warned them surrender meant torture, rape, death. Better to die with honor. 37 nurses in her unit had chosen suicide on August 15th, leaping from Suicide Cliff into the Pacific, rather than face what awaited in American hands. Kimiko had been too weak to climb. Now, as a female American soldier approached with a clipboard and, impossibly, a smile, Kimiko wondered if the dead had made the right choice. The indoctrination of absolute terror. Kimiko Watanabe had graduated from the Tokyo Imperial Nursing Academy in 1940 at age 19. Born in Hiroshima to a railway clerk and a seamstress, she'd grown up during the militarization of Japan, when school children began each day bowing toward the imperial palace and memorizing the Senjinkun, the military code that declared death preferable to the shame of capture. By 1943, when Kimiko deployed to field hospitals in the Pacific, every Japanese soldier and auxiliary personnel had been saturated with specific propaganda about American savagery. The Shashin Shuho weekly photo magazine published images of American soldiers allegedly posing with Japanese skulls as trophies. Newsreels showed burnt villages and claimed American forces routinely tortured prisoners. Radio broadcasts detailed how American men, Kichiku, Bei-ai, British and American devils, specifically targeted Japanese women for sexual violence. "If captured, you will be stripped naked and paraded through streets," her commanding officer, Major Yoshida, had told the nurses before Saipan. "They will violate you, then kill you slowly. Every one of you carries cyanide for this reason. Use it before they touch you." The reality Kimiko had experienced seemed to confirm these warnings. During the American invasion of Saipan in June 1944, she'd witnessed carpet bombing that turned the hospital cave into a crematorium. Of her 80 nursing colleagues, 63 died in those caves. The survivors spent 14 months hiding in jungle ravines, eating grass, beetles, tree bark. 2 nurses died from malnutrition, 3 from disease. The island's civilian population had been so terrified that hundreds had jumped to their deaths rather than surrender, entire families leaping from cliffs while clutching children. Kimiko had seen it. The propaganda wasn't abstract. It was confirmed by the smoke and blood and screaming. The numbers told a story of civilizations on different planets. In 1944, Japan's total industrial production, $8 billion. America's, $198 billion. Per capita GDP in Japan, 473. In America, 11,635. Daily calorie ration for Japanese soldiers in the Pacific. Ural 800, rarely achieved, often below 1,200. For American soldiers, 4,758. Japanese military medical supplies per 1,000 soldiers, 12 pounds. American, 387 pounds. But statistics meant nothing to someone who'd never seen abundance. Kimiko's entire conception of America came from propaganda films showing Dust Bowl poverty and breadlines during the Depression. She'd been taught America was a paper tiger, rich but weak, industrial but spiritually empty, powerful but cowardly. What she didn't know was that her entire worldview was about to detonate. First contact, the impossible feast. The American woman soldier, Kimiko would learn her name was Lieutenant Margaret O'Brien, led the group of Japanese women into a large Quonset hut. The September heat made the metal building radiate warmth, but inside, fans whirred. Electric fans. Multiple electric fans running constantly, wasting electricity as if it were free. Kimiko's eyes adjusted to the dimmer interior. She froze. Before them stretched a table. Not a small table. A banquet table, 12 feet long, covered with a white cloth. And on that cloth, food. Not survival rations, not sparse portions carefully measured. Food, abundance, impossible, overwhelming. Surely this is a hallucination food. Kimiko's vision narrowed to individual items, her starved brain cataloging each one with the obsession of someone who'd spent 17 months dreaming of adequate meals. White bread, sliced, stacked, at least 40 pieces, each an inch thick, arranged on 3 plates. The same bread, whose smell had ambushed her at the gate. Butter. Real butter, yellow and glistening, in a ceramic bowl with a knife. Eggs. Scrambled eggs, steam still rising from a serving dish, enough to have required 2 dozen eggs, maybe 3 dozen. Bacon. Strips of bacon, crispy and brown, piled on a platter. The smell hit her, and her knees weakened. Milk. 3 glass pitchers of milk. White cold milk with condensation beating on the glass. Coffee. A large urn of coffee with sugar and cream beside it. Fresh fruit. Oranges, apples, bananas, arranged in a bowl. Canned peaches, opened, glistening in syrup. Behind Kimiko, someone made a choking sound. Sachiko Tanaka pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Another woman, Private Yuki Nakamura from the communications unit, sank to the floor and began to sob. "Please, sit," Lieutenant O'Brien said through a translator, a Japanese-American woman named Alice Yamamoto. "This is your welcome meal. You must be hungry." Kimiko's thoughts fragmented into shards of incomprehension. This is poison. Must be poison. They'll watch us eat it and die. No, why waste this much food to poison us? Easier to shoot us. This is a trick. They'll take it away. They'll make us watch them eat it. This isn't real. I'm dead. I died in the cave, and this is the afterlife playing tricks. But I can smell it. Dead people don't smell anything. Do they? It's a trap. Sachiko whispered in Japanese, apparently forgetting the translator could understand. Don't touch anything. But Private Keiko Sato, 20 years old, rail-thin, her nursing uniform hanging off her frame like a shroud, was already moving toward the table. Her hand shook violently as she reached for a piece of bread. She lifted it, stared at it, then, defying all the warnings shouting in Kimiko's brain, bit into it. Keiko's eyes closed. Her entire body trembled. She chewed slowly, deliberately, as if the act might vanish if performed too quickly. Then she swallowed and released a sound, half gasp, half sob, that made Kimiko's chest constrict. "Oishi," Keiko whispered. "Delicious." Then louder, breaking into raw weeping. "Honto ni oishi." Really delicious. The dam broke. 24 starving women surged toward the table. The slow disintegration of certainty. Kimiko sat on a wooden chair, a real chair, sturdy and new, with a plate before her containing 3 eggs, 2 strips of bacon, 2 pieces of bread with butter, and a cup of coffee with milk and sugar. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the fork. The first bite of egg entered her mouth, and her body responded with violent intensity. Saliva flooded so quickly she nearly choked. Her stomach cramped. Tears sprang unbidden to her eyes, not from emotion, but from pure physiological response to protein and fat after so long without. She forced herself to eat slowly. 2 nurses had already vomited from eating too quickly, their shrunken stomachs rebelling against sudden abundance. Lieutenant O'Brien moved calmly among them, instructing them gently through the translator to take small bites, wait between mouthfuls, let their bodies adjust. There was no mockery, no cruelty, just patience. Kimiko watched the American women moving through the room. They wore clean, well-fitted uniforms. Their faces were full, not gaunt, not starved, but healthy with flesh over bones. Their teeth were straight and white. Their hair was clean and styled. They moved with energy, not the conservation of calories shuffle that had become automatic for Japanese personnel in the Pacific. One American nurse, seeing an elderly Japanese woman struggling to butter her bread with palsied hands, knelt beside her and did it for her, gently, as if the woman were a patient, not a prisoner, not an enemy. Sachiko, sitting beside Kimiko, ate mechanically while staring at nothing. Poisoned, she muttered between bites. Must be poisoned. We'll die tonight. But even Sachiko kept eating. Even Sachiko, who'd been captured after attempting to blow up an American supply depot, couldn't resist the eggs and butter and bread. The body's need overrode the mind's resistance. "How much do you think this meal cost?" whispered Nurse Haruko Yamamoto, 42 years old, the senior member of their group. She'd served in Manchuria before the Pacific. She'd seen things. She didn't trust easily. Kimiko calculated roughly. Eggs, bacon, bread, butter, fruit, coffee, milk. For all of us, maybe 200 yen. "Try 500, Haruko said quietly, and they gave it to prisoners. On our first day, what kind of nation feeds prisoners' feasts? The question hung in the air, unanswered and terrifying. After the meal, which nobody died from, though several became sick from overindulgence, the women were led to barracks. Not cages, not pens. Wooden barracks with cots, thin mattresses, pillows, and blankets. Each woman received a towel, a bar of soap, and a toothbrush. A toothbrush. Kimiko stared at the small object in her palm. She hadn't brushed her teeth in 17 months. She'd used twigs and salt water when available. Most of her colleagues had lost teeth to malnutrition and scurvy. And now this casual gift, a toothbrush, as if it were nothing. "Tomorrow you'll see the doctor for health examinations," Lieutenant O'Brien explained through the translator. "After that, showers, hot water showers. Then you'll receive clean clothing." Hot water showers. The phrase sounded like poetry, like something from before the war, from a lifetime ago when such things existed. Kimiko had been bathing in cold jungle streams when she bathed at all. Most of the past year had been spent simply surviving. Hygiene, an impossible luxury. That night, lying on an actual mattress for the first time in 2 years, Kimiko couldn't sleep. Around her, other women wept quietly or snored, already asleep despite the strangeness, their exhausted bodies surrendering to safety their minds couldn't yet accept. "Why aren't they hurting us?" someone whispered in the darkness. Nobody answered. Nobody had an answer. 3 days later, the medical miracle. Monday, September 17th, 1945. Tinian Island Medical Facility, Provisional POW Camp 7. The examination room gleamed with cleanliness that hurt Kimiko's eyes. White walls, chrome fixtures, glass cabinets filled with medical supplies, more supplies visible in this one room than she'd had for her entire unit during 2 years of war. Dr. Sarah Goldstein, a Jewish-American physician from Brooklyn, examined Kimiko with thorough gentleness. She spoke no Japanese, but her translator conveyed each step. "She's checking your eyes now. Now your throat. This might be cold." The stethoscope. Kimiko submitted passively, still waiting for the cruelty to begin. But Dr. Goldstein's face showed only professional concern as she documented the damage. Severe malnutrition, probable scurvy, infected lesions on both legs, suspected tuberculosis exposure, possible parasitic infection. "Your weight is 38 kilograms, the translator said. Kimiko had been 52 kilograms before the war. "The doctor says you need immediate treatment for malnutrition and infections. You'll receive vitamin injections, antibiotics, and a special diet to restore your health." Antibiotics. Kimiko knew the word from medical training. Penicillin, the miracle drug. Japan had never managed large-scale production. Her hospital on Saipan had possessed exactly 12 vials for 800 patients. Men had died from infected wounds that antibiotics could have saved, but there were never enough. Never remotely enough. "How much penicillin do you have?" Kimiko asked in halting English she'd learned in nursing school. Dr. Goldstein smiled. "Enough," she said simply. Later, Kimiko learned the statistics. American penicillin production in 1945, 650 billion units per month. Japanese production, less than 10 billion units for the entire war. The Americans were treating enemy prisoners with a drug Japan couldn't produce for its own soldiers. The vitamin injection stung, but within hours, Kimiko felt something she couldn't immediately identify. It took until evening to name it, slightly less exhausted. The fog of malnutrition that had clouded her thinking for months lifted marginally. Her legs hurt less. She could focus her eyes more easily. Sachiko received the same treatment, along with everyone else. By the third day, the change was visible. Women who'd been gray-skinned and hollow-eyed showed hints of color. The constant fatigue that had made every movement an effort began receding. "I don't understand," Sachiko said on the fourth day, sitting on her cot and staring at her hands. "Why heal us? If they're going to kill us anyway, why waste medicine?" The shower that shattered worldviews. Thursday, September 20th, 1945. 6 days after capture, the women were led to a long building marked sanitation facility. Inside, a changing area with benches and lockers, and beyond it, a tiled room with 20 shower heads protruding from pipes along the walls. 15 minutes, Lieutenant O'Brien announced. "Hot water, use the soap and shampoo provided. Take your time." Kimiko stood paralyzed, staring at the shower heads. The propaganda came flooding back, stories of gas chambers disguised as showers. The Shashin Shuho had published articles about Jewish prisoners in Europe being tricked into delousing chambers that were actually death traps. The parallel was obvious. Too obvious. "Gas," whispered Private Nakamura. "They're going to gas us." "No," said Haruko firmly. The older nurse stepped forward, turned a shower knob, and hot water, actual hot water, steaming and abundant, cascaded down. She stuck her hand under the stream, let the water run over her fingers, then met the eyes of the younger women. "It's real!" Kimiko approached her own shower with trembling hands. She turned the knob. Hot water. She adjusted the other knob. Cold water. She could control the temperature. She stood there, fully clothed, watching water pour from the shower head in unlimited volume, and something inside her chest cracked. In Saipan, water had been carried in buckets from polluted streams. Rationed, precious, women bathed with a single cup of water, washing one body part at a time. And here, water poured freely, hot and clean, and endless. How much energy did it take to heat this much water? How much fuel? How much infrastructure to create pipes that delivered it on demand? She undressed slowly, folded her filthy uniform, the same uniform she'd worn for 4 months, and stepped under the spray. The water hit her skin, and she gasped. Heat. Clean heat. She stood motionless, letting water she hadn't earned and didn't deserve pour over her starved body. Around her, other women were weeping, not from fear, from the sheer, overwhelming sensation of being clean. The soap, actual soap, not the caustic lye mixture they'd occasionally scrounged, lathered in her hands. She washed her hair with shampoo that smelled like flowers. Flowers. As if beauty mattered. As if aesthetics were important enough to manufacture into soap for prisoners. 15 minutes passed. Nobody turned off the water. The Americans didn't come shouting. The water kept running. After 20 minutes, Kimiko finally turned off her shower, not because anyone forced her, but because she couldn't process any more contradictions. Clean towels waited on benches. Clean clothes, simple cotton shirts and pants, sized appropriately, freshly laundered. Clean underwear, clean socks. Kimiko dressed in enemy clothes and felt human for the first time in 2 years. "What kind of war is this?" Nurse Misako Tanaka asked, 24 years old, from Nagasaki. She sat on a bench, clean and clothed, staring at her own hands as if they belonged to a stranger. What kind of enemy does this? The library that proved the impossible. Tuesday, September 25th, 1945. 11 days into captivity. The women were permitted limited movement within the camp compound. Kimiko discovered the recreation building by accident, following a group of American soldiers. She expected it to be restricted. Instead, a sign in English, Japanese, and Korean read, "Education Center, open to all personnel." Inside, a library, not a small collection. Hundreds of books lined wooden shelves, magazines, newspapers, tables with chairs. A radio playing music quietly. American soldiers sat reading. 2 Filipino POWs played checkers. And in the corner, a Japanese man, a civilian internee from Guam, read a newspaper. Kimiko stood in the doorway, unable to move. In Japan, paper had been rationed since 1943. Newspapers had shrunk to single sheets. Books were luxuries, often pulped for wartime use. And here, books surrounded her in casual abundance, available to prisoners. The librarian, an elderly American sergeant named Robert Patterson, noticed her hesitation. Through gestures and simple English, he invited her inside. He showed her the Japanese language section, 20 books, mostly pre-war literature, Soseki, Tanizaki, even some poetry. But it was the English language magazines that destroyed her. Life magazine, National Geographic. Time. She couldn't read English fluently, but the photographs told stories her propaganda training couldn't explain away. She opened a Life magazine from June 1945. Advertisements filled half the pages. Advertisements for cars, washing machines, refrigerators, vacuum cleaners, cosmetics, clothing, food, endless food. Images of American families smiling in suburban homes with green lawns, children playing with toys, women in department stores selecting from rows of shoes. This was the enemy. This nation of abundance and casual waste. This was the weak, decadent America she'd been taught to despise. She found a National Geographic from 1944 during the height of the war. An article about American factory production showed photographs of assembly lines producing bombers. One facility in Michigan produced 17 B-24 bombers per day. Per day. The entire Japanese aviation industry had struggled to produce 28,000 aircraft during the entire war. This single factory exceeded Japanese monthly production. "Uso da," she whispered again, but the magazine was real, physical in her hands. Sachiko found her there an hour later, sitting at a table surrounded by magazines, tears streaming silently down her face. "What is it?" Sachiko asked. Kimiko pushed a Life magazine across the table. "Look at the date, June 1945, 3 months ago, during the war." She pointed to an advertisement showing a family picnic with a car, a basket of food, a lake, everyone smiling. This is what their civilians had while their soldiers were fighting us. This is what they could still afford. Sachiko studied the image, her face hardening. Propaganda. American propaganda. Then why show it to prisoners? Kimiko asked. Why let us see it? No answer came. Over the following days, Kimiko returned to the library obsessively. She brought other nurses. They looked at the magazines together, turning pages in silence, accumulating evidence that couldn't be denied. Numbers embedded in articles painted the picture. American car ownership, 1941. 29.6 million vehicles. Japanese car ownership, 47,000 vehicles. American telephone lines, 1940. 21 million Japanese telephone lines, 1.4 million American electricity production, 1944, 279 billion kilowatt hours, Japanese production, 34 billion kilowatt hours, American steel production, 1944, 89.6 million tons, Japanese production, 7.8 million tons. Each statistic was a hammer blow against certainty. The gap wasn't close. It was astronomical. Japan hadn't been fighting a peer competitor. It had been fighting an industrial god. How did we think we could win? Haruko asked one evening, sitting with a 2-year-old Time magazine article about Detroit automotive production being converted to tank manufacturing. Nobody answered. The question was too large, too terrible in its implications. The garbage that revealed truth, Friday, September 28, 1945. 2 weeks into captivity, Kimiko and 4 other nurses were assigned to light work duty, helping prepare vegetables in the camp kitchen, not as punishment, but as therapy. The American doctors believed light activity aided recovery from malnutrition. The kitchen was a revelation. Industrial refrigerators humming constantly, gas stoves with 8 burners, sinks with running hot and cold water, cabinets stocked with spices, canned goods, dried foods, fresh vegetables. The abundance was numbing in its magnitude. But what broke Kimiko's understanding of reality wasn't what they kept. It was what they threw away. She watched an American cook trim fat from beef and throw the trimmings in a garbage bin. Real beef fat, which could have been rendered for cooking or eating. Just discarded. She watched vegetables being prepared, carrot peels, potato skins, lettuce outer leaves, all thrown away. The peels alone would have been treasured in Saipan, boiled for soup, dried for storage, fed to the sick who needed anything. And then she saw the baker scraping burnt bread into the garbage. Not moldy, not rotted, just slightly burnt. 3 loaves, maybe 2 pounds of bread, thrown away because it was imperfect. Kimiko's hand stopped moving. She stared at the garbage bin, her mind fragmenting. On Saipan, she'd watched soldiers fight over a single dried fish. She'd seen men weep while eating grass and bark. She'd held dying patients who whispered about rice, dreaming of rice even as they stopped breathing. And here, the enemy discarded food that would have saved lives because it wasn't pretty enough. "Excuse me," she said in careful English to the baker, Sergeant Thomas Mitchell from Iowa. "This bread, why trash?" Sergeant Mitchell looked at the burnt loaves and shrugged. "Too burnt. Nobody wants to eat it. I'll make fresh." "But it's still food." "Sure, but we have plenty. No point serving bad bread when I can make good bread." We have plenty. 4 words that encapsulated a gulf wider than the Pacific. Kimiko thought of her own nation's wartime slogans. Hoshigarimasen katsu meidwa. We won't desire anything until we win. Zeitaku wa tekida. Luxury is the enemy. Every Japanese citizen had endured rationing, gone hungry, sacrificed everything for the war effort. They'd been told sacrifice was necessary because resources were limited, because the enemy was powerful, because only total devotion could bring victory, and the enemy had been throwing away food. Not because they were cruel, because they had so much that perfection was achievable, because waste was meaningless when abundance was infinite. That evening, Kimiko wrote her first letter home to Hiroshima. Letters were now permitted, and struggled to find words that wouldn't be censored or disbelieved. "We are treated well," she wrote carefully. "There is food, clean water, medical care. I am regaining health." She paused, pen hovering over paper, wondering how to convey the truth without sounding insane. Finally, she added, "Mother, I have seen things that I cannot yet explain. When I return, we will speak. But know this, much of what we believed was incomplete." Her hand shook as she sealed the letter. Incomplete. Such a small word for such a massive lie. The breaking point, witnessing peace. Monday, October 8, 1945. Nearly 4 weeks into captivity. The psychological transformation had been progressing in waves. Denial, suspicion, confusion, reluctant acknowledgement. But the breaking point came not from what the Americans did to their prisoners, but from what Kimiko witnessed them doing for their own. A supply ship arrived at Tinian carrying mail from home. Kimiko watched American soldiers receive their letters, and what she saw made her chest constrict. The men wept, openly, without shame. They read letters from wives, mothers, children, and cried with joy. They showed photographs around, laughing and proud. They spoke of going home, of peacetime, of futures they could plan again. Their relief was tangible, overwhelming, real. These weren't conquerors drunk on victory. They were exhausted people grateful the killing had stopped. One young private, maybe 20 years old, sat on a bench near the barracks, reading a letter with tears streaming down his face. Kimiko walked past, then stopped. She shouldn't care. He was the enemy, but something in his expression was too familiar. "Good news?" she asked in English. He looked up, startled to be addressed by a Japanese prisoner. Then he smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. "My wife. She had our baby. A girl, Sarah, born 3 weeks ago." He showed her a small photograph, a woman holding a tiny infant. "Congratulations," Kimiko said. "Thanks." He looked at the photo again, his smile fading into something more complex. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, "about the war, about everything." Kimiko stood frozen. An apology. From a victor to the vanquished. From a soldier to an enemy prisoner. What kind of people apologize for winning? "I'm a teacher," he continued, as if speaking to himself. "High school history, Iowa. I just want to go home and teach again. No more killing, no more death, just normalcy." He stood, nodded politely, and walked away, clutching his letter. Kimiko returned to her barracks and lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling. Around her, other women prepared for evening meal, chatted quietly, mended clothes. Routine, normalcy. They'd stopped waiting to be executed, stopped expecting torture. The fear had eroded so gradually they hadn't noticed until it was gone. "I was wrong," Sachiko said quietly from the adjacent cot. She'd been silent for days, observing everything with her telegrapher's attention to detail. "About all of it." "We all were," Haruko answered. "No." Sachiko sat up, her face haggard despite improving health. "I mean the core belief. I thought we were fighting for survival against barbarians who wanted to destroy us. But they don't want destruction. They wanted us to stop. There's a difference." "The propaganda," Kimiko started. "The propaganda was poison," Sachiko interrupted, her voice cracking. "Deliberate poison. They told us surrender meant death, so we'd fight to the last. They told us Americans were devils, so we'd never question why we couldn't feed our own soldiers. They told us we were superior, so we wouldn't ask why our equipment was inferior. They told us sacrifice was noble, so we wouldn't notice our leaders were sending us to die for a war we couldn't win. The silence that followed was absolute, because once the words were spoken, they couldn't be unspoken, and everyone in that barracks knew they were true. My brother died at Iwo Jima, Private Keiko Sato whispered. He was 19. He wrote me before the battle. He said he was proud to die for the emperor. He believed it. He really believed it. Her voice broke. And for what? So we could throw away lives fighting a nation that makes 3 meals of what we make in a week. Nurse Misako Tanaka spoke next, her voice hollow. My city is Nagasaki. My family wrote me in July, before the bomb. They were starving, eating sweet potato vines. My little sister got sick from malnutrition. They asked if I had any food to send. She laughed bitterly. I was eating grass in a cave, and now I eat 3 meals a day as a prisoner. What does that mean? What does that say about our leaders? It says they lied, Haruko stated flatly. They lied about the enemy. They lied about our chances. They lied about what surrender would mean. They lied about everything, and we believed them because we trusted them, and millions died because of those lies. Kimiko felt something inside her chest crack open. A dam of loyalty and conditioning and patriotic fervor built over 2 decades of indoctrination. Behind it, rage, grief, betrayal, and underneath it all, shame. Shame for believing, shame for surviving when others died believing, shame for the relief she felt at being captured instead of dying, as she'd been taught was honorable. We have to tell them, Kimiko said. When we go home, we have to tell everyone the truth. They won't believe us, Sachiko replied. We barely believe it, and we're living it. Then we make them believe, Haruko said fiercely. We show them. We tell them what we saw. We make them understand that the lies killed us, that the propaganda was the real enemy. Around them, other women nodded, a consensus forming, a mission crystallizing. They'd been taught they were fighting for survival. They'd discovered they'd been fighting for lies. And that discovery changed everything. Repatriation, carrying truth back to ashes. December 12, 1945, 3 months after capture, Yokohama Port, Japan. The repatriation ship USS General H.W. Butner docked in a harbor Kimiko barely recognized. The industrial waterfront she'd known before the war was rubble, destroyed buildings, burnt warehouses, devastation stretching to the horizon. The women disembarked wearing clean American Red Cross clothing, carrying bags with supplies, soap, towels, canned food, blankets. They were healthy, heavier by 8 to 12 kilograms each, skin clear, energy restored. They looked better than they had in years. The Japanese civilians waiting at the dock looked like ghosts, gaunt faces, hollow eyes, clothes hanging off skeletal frames, children with distended bellies from malnutrition. The contrast was obscene. Kimiko's mother, Hana Watanabe, stood in the crowd. Kimiko almost didn't recognize her. The woman who'd been pleasantly rounded before the war was now withered. Her face collapsed into her skull. When they embraced, Kimiko could feel every bone. You look well, her mother whispered, wonder and confusion in her voice. You look healthy. I was captured, Kimiko said. The Americans, they fed us, treated us. I was a prisoner, mother, and they fed me better than our own army fed its soldiers. Her mother pulled back, studied her face. Don't say such things. The Kempeitai are still active. They'll arrest you for defeatist talk. The war is over. The truth can't be defeatist if there's no war to defeat. But as Kimiko traveled from Yokohama to Hiroshima, a journey that took 3 days on damaged rail lines through devastated countryside, she understood her mother's warning. Japan was broken, traumatized, and not ready to hear that the lies had been worse than the bombs. Hiroshima existed only as a scar. The city center was ash. Her family's home had been 2.1 kilometers from the hypocenter, far enough to partially survive, though heavily damaged. Her father had died from radiation sickness in September. Her younger sister had survived but was ill, possibly from radiation exposure. Kimiko stood in the ruins of her childhood home and felt the full weight of betrayal. This devastation, this death, could have been avoided, should have been avoided, if leaders had accepted the truth visible in every factory statistic, every production report, every casualty list. If they'd negotiated peace when defeat was inevitable instead of demanding sacrifice until the enemy deployed atomic fire. Was it bad? Her sister Emiko asked, 16 years old, looking 12 from malnutrition. The Americans. Were they cruel? Kimiko looked at this girl who'd survived an atomic bomb, who'd spent the last months of the war starving while the government demanded total sacrifice, who'd believed the propaganda about enemy devils until the end. No, Kimiko said quietly. They weren't cruel. And that's what makes it worse. They fed us, healed us, gave us clean water and medicine and dignity. They treated us better than our own government treated its people, and we were the enemy. Emiko stared at her sister, processing words that contradicted everything she'd been taught. But the radio said they were demons, that they tortured prisoners. The radio lied, Kimiko said simply. About many things. The testimony. 40 years later, June 15, 1985, Tokyo, Japan. The National Diet Library, Oral History Project. Kimiko Watanabe, now Kimiko Tanaka after marriage, 74 years old, retired nurse and mother of 3, sat before a recorder telling her story for the official record. People ask me now why I didn't speak publicly about my experiences immediately after the war, she said, her voice still strong despite her age. The truth is, Japan wasn't ready. We were occupied, we were traumatized, and the shame was too great. Not the shame of defeat, but the shame of having believed so completely in lies that killed millions. She paused, sipping tea from a cup, comfortable, well-fed, living in a Japan that had become one of the world's wealthiest nations, allied with the same America it had once fought to destroy. I did speak privately, to my family, to friends, to other nurses. Many of us who survived captivity shared similar experiences. We formed a support group in 1947, 37 former female POWs. We called ourselves Shinri no Kai, the Truth Society. We collected our testimonies, wrote them down, kept records. We knew someday Japan would be ready to hear. The interviewer, a young historian named Professor Nakamura, asked, "What was the most difficult thing for Japanese society to accept about your testimony?" Kimiko smiled sadly. "That we had been treated well. That sounds strange, doesn't it? But many Japanese preferred to believe we'd suffered horribly as prisoners. It fit the narrative. We suffered. They were cruel. We were all victims together. The reality was uncomfortable. If the enemy treated prisoners well, while our government let civilians starve, what did that say about who was truly barbaric? Did you ever regret survival? Wish you'd chosen suicide, as so many did? Never." Kimiko's answer was immediate and fierce. "I survived to bear witness. 37 nurses in my unit died at Suicide Cliff, believing they were escaping torture. They died for a lie. I lived to tell the truth. That was my duty, not to the emperor, but to them. To make sure their unnecessary deaths meant something." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small object, carefully preserved in plastic. A bar of soap, American soap from 1945, 40 years old, never used. "I kept this," she said, holding it up. "This one bar of soap. They gave it to me on my first day as a prisoner. In my entire nursing career in the Japanese military, 3 years of service, I never received a full bar of soap. Not once. But the enemy gave it to me freely, on day 1 before they even knew my name." She set it on the table between them. "This soap represents everything. The abundance we couldn't match. The casual kindness we weren't shown by our own leaders. The propaganda we believed. Every time I look at it, I remember that wars aren't just fought with bullets and bombs. They're fought with production capacity and resources and the willingness to care for your own people. We lost that war in factory floors and supply chains long before we lost it on battlefields." Professor Nakamura asked the question researchers always asked, "Do you think Japan could have won the war?" Kimiko laughed, a short, sharp sound. "I saw American garbage bins in 1945 that contained more food than Japanese soldiers received as rations. I saw them throw away burnt bread while our civilians ate tree bark. I saw electric fans running constantly to keep prisoners comfortable while Tokyo had rolling blackouts. No, we could never have won. The question isn't whether we could have won. The question is why our leaders made us fight a war they knew was unwinnable. and why they lied to us about what defeat would mean. She leaned forward, her elderly eyes intense. I want young people to understand something. Propaganda isn't just lies about the enemy, it's lies about yourself. They told us we were superior while we starved. They told us sacrifice was noble while they lived in comfort. They told us death was honorable while they clung to power. The greatest victims of Japanese propaganda weren't the Americans we fought. It was us. We believed, and we died believing. And that's the true crime. Historical reckoning. The academic consensus. The experiences Kimiko and her fellow prisoners described weren't anomalies. Historians have extensively documented the treatment of Japanese POWs by American forces, particularly female prisoners, and the findings consistently support their testimonies. Dr. Ulrich Strauss, German-American historian and author of The Anguish of Surrender, Japanese POWs of World War II, 1982, wrote, "The gap between Japanese expectations of captivity and American treatment created profound psychological trauma, but trauma of a unique kind. Prisoners expected brutality and received humanity. This contradiction forced a complete reevaluation of beliefs, often more psychologically difficult than physical abuse would have been." Statistics documented the disparities Kimiko had witnessed. Daily caloric intake, Japanese military rations, 1945 Pacific. 1,200 calories, rarely achieved. American military rations, 4,658 calories. Japanese POW rations in U.S. custody, 3,500 calories. Medical care per capita. Japanese military medical supplies, 1945. Sufficient for 23% of personnel. American POW camp medical supplies. Sufficient for 140% of prisoners. Mortality rate in American POW camps. Japanese prisoners. 3.5% mortality rate in Japanese POW camps, Allied prisoners. 27% post-war outcomes of the approximately 6,000 female Japanese prisoners, military and civilian, held by U.S. forces at war's end. 94% survived captivity and repatriation. 147 later immigrated to the United States. 231 married American servicemen. Dozens became active in Japanese-American cultural exchange programs. Dr. Haruko Taya Cook, Japanese historian at the International Research Center for Japanese Studies, noted in her 1993 study, Japan at War, An Oral History. Female prisoners in particular experienced a profound cognitive dissonance. They'd been taught that capture meant sexual violation and death. Instead, they found medical care, adequate food, and respect for their dignity. This wasn't benevolence. It was American adherence to Geneva Convention standards, but to Japanese prisoners who'd never experienced such standards, it seemed miraculous. The propaganda apparatus that had shaped Kimiko's expectations was documented extensively. The Senjin-kun Military Field Code of 1941 explicitly stated, "Do not live in shame as a prisoner. Die to avoid the disgrace of captivity." This wasn't mere rhetoric. It was official policy that contributed directly to mass civilian suicides on Saipan, Okinawa, and elsewhere. Professor John Dower, in his Pulitzer Prize-winning Embracing Defeat Japan in the Wake of World War II, 1999, wrote, "The treatment of Japanese prisoners by American forces became one of history's great ironies. The barbarians proved humane. The demons proved decent. This reality, perhaps more than military defeat itself, shattered the ideological foundations of Japanese militarism. You can accept losing to a stronger enemy. It's much harder to accept that the enemy was morally superior." Echoes across generations, March 23, 2008, San Francisco, California. The Japanese-American National Museum hosted an exhibition titled Pacific Prisoners: The Other Side of War. Kimiko Watanabe Tanaka, now 97 years old, attended via video link from her retirement home in Kyoto. Her granddaughter Yuki Tanaka, a political science professor at Stanford, stood beside the screen. The exhibition displayed artifacts from Japanese POW camps, soap bars, Red Cross packages, medical records, photographs of prisoners gaining weight, smiling, even playing baseball. Testimony after testimony described the same shock, the same disbelief, the same transformation. "My grandmother's story isn't unique," Professor Yuki Tanaka told the assembled crowd. "It's representative. Thousands of Japanese prisoners experienced the same revelation." And most struggled to speak about it for decades because the truth was uncomfortable. It meant acknowledging that the propaganda had been more destructive than the bombs, that the ideology had been the true enemy. On the video screen, elderly Kimiko nodded. "I've lived 63 years since the war ended," she said, her voice wavering but clear. "I've seen Japan transform from ashes to prosperity. I've seen former enemies become friends. I've lived long enough to see my grandchildren study in America, marry Americans, build lives that would have been unthinkable in 1945. She held up the same bar of soap, ancient now, yellowed, but still recognizable. "This soap is 93 years old," she said with a slight smile. "Older than some people in this room. I've kept it all these years because it reminds me of the most important lesson of my life. Never trust those who tell you to hate the enemy more than you should question your own leaders." "The Americans didn't defeat Japan with that soap," she continued. "But that soap represented why Japan lost. Not because Americans were better people. They had their own sins, their own injustices. But because American leaders built systems that could produce so much that they could afford to waste. Japanese leaders built systems that starved their own people while demanding sacrifice for the emperor." She looked directly into the camera. "Young people, when leaders tell you sacrifice is noble, ask them what they're sacrificing. When they tell you the enemy is evil, ask them what makes your side good. When they tell you death is preferable to surrender, ask them why they're still alive to tell you so." That soap taught me those questions. I hope it teaches you too. The final testimony, February 3rd, 2011, Kyoto, Japan. Kimiko Watanabe Tanaka passed away in her sleep at age 99. Her obituary in the Asahi Shimbun described her as a witness to transformation, a voice for uncomfortable truths, a survivor who refused to forget. At her memorial service, attended by over 300 people, her daughter Michiko read from a letter Kimiko had written to be opened after her death. "I have spent 66 years processing what I learned in 4 months as a prisoner in 1945. The Americans didn't just feed us. They showed us what we'd been fighting for was a lie. Not intentionally. They were simply being themselves, following their own rules, treating prisoners according to standards they considered normal. But normal American standards exceeded the best Japanese standards. That was the revelation. That was what we couldn't accept. That was what eventually forced us to rebuild our entire worldview." I don't tell this story to praise America or condemn Japan. Both nations have committed terrible acts. Both have built great civilizations. What I tell this story for is simpler: to show that propaganda kills more thoroughly than bullets because it kills truth first, and without truth, all other deaths are meaningless. 37 women jumped from suicide cliff believing lies. I live to tell the truth. That has been my purpose, my duty, and my burden. To anyone reading this, question everything, especially the things you're told not to question, especially the things you're told you must believe to be loyal, especially the things that require others to die while those giving orders stay safe. And remember, a bar of soap can teach more about the nature of war than 1,000 battlefield victories. I kept my soap. I hope you keep your questions. Epilogue. The soap that spoke. The bar of soap. Kimiko, preserved for 66 years, now resides in the Japanese-American National Museum in Los Angeles. It sits in a small display case alongside her nursing uniform, her identification tags, and a photograph taken in November 1945 showing 24 Japanese women standing outside their barracks at Tinian Island. In the photograph, they're smiling. Not propaganda smiles, real smiles. The smiles of people who expected death and found life, who expected cruelty and found decency, who expected their beliefs confirmed and instead found them shattered. The placard beside the display reads, "This soap was issued to Japanese Army nurse Kimiko Watanabe on September 14, 1945, her first day as a prisoner of war. She had been taught that capture meant torture and death. Instead, she received soap, food, medical care, and dignity. This single object represented a transformation in understanding that shaped the rest of her life. Thousands visit the display each year. Many Japanese tourists stand silently before it, reading Kimiko's testimony, processing the implications. Many American visitors see it and understand, perhaps for the first time, that victory in war isn't just about defeating enemies. It's about what you stand for when you have power over those you've defeated. The soap has become a symbol, not of American superiority or Japanese inferiority, but of the power of material reality to obliterate propaganda, of how small truths, a bar of soap, a shower, a meal, can dismantle entire ideologies. Kimiko never forgot the smell of fresh bread on September 14, 1945. Decades later, whenever she baked bread for her children and grandchildren, she would remember that moment when certainty collapsed and truth began. The smell that started as a shock became a comfort, then a reminder, finally a lesson. Bake bread, she told her grandchildren. Feed people. Create abundance, because abundance is the best argument against tyranny, and hunger is tyranny's best weapon. The soap sits in its case, yellow and ancient, bearing witness. It survived the war, survived the peace, survived its owner. It remains one small object that helped change a worldview, one fragment of a larger truth that took millions of deaths to teach. In 1945, that soap was just soap. By 2011, it had become testimony, not to American virtue or Japanese vice, but to the power of material reality to destroy lies, and the courage required to accept truth when it contradicts everything you've been taught to believe. 24 women stood outside Tinian Island Barracks in November 1945, healthy and whole, holding small objects that proved their world had been built on falsehoods. They carried those objects home. They carried those truths into the future. They lived long enough to speak them aloud, and their words, like that soap, endure.